Welcome to another edition of the live and investigator stream for the third week in January 2021. I have a couple subjects that we'll start with, and then we'll get to your questions as you put them in. Again, you can always email to help@activeintel.com, or you can message on the screen next to the video. First subject we're going to talk about is something that came up with a client that we work with recently, where they were working on a court case that was going to be a lawsuit, hopefully for the purposes of getting them a judgment in their favor for some damages. And the question comes up quite a bit is, how can you do an investigation in advance of a court case to help your case? And this is very common. The case that you'll have, whether it's small claims or even a full circuit court litigation, in many cases is going to have evidence that you'll need to bring, and that'll be part of your investigation. But more importantly, you may want to find out what the assets that other party has, so you can see, first of all, what you might be up against, and second of all, to see what type of assets you might be able to collect once the case is over. If you're up against somebody with a lot of assets, that might be a good thing that you can collect afterwards, but it also means that they have more assets maybe to defend themselves with the case. If for some reason your defendant that you're suing appears to have minimal assets, that might be helpful to you because you don't have a war chest for legal fees that they're going to put up against you. But on the other hand, it might mean that when you're done, it might be harder to collect assets. And we'll talk about ways to identify assets. So when you're doing an investigation pre-litigation, first of all, remember that we're not attorneys. We're not giving you legal advice. You want to get good legal advice before you take any action regarding litigation or a court case. But if you're doing your own research, which this client actually had done a great deal of research, he had really started quite a bit of advanced investigation on her own. One of the things we recommend looking at is prior claims. Do they have any prior lawsuits? Have they been in court before as a defendant? If that's the case, you may find that a lot of the evidence you need for your case has already been presented in court. If, let's say, it's a business which sells some type of a product and you're suing this business because the product is defective, you may find that other people have sued the business for the same thing. And if you open up those cases, pull those documents, you might find other people have already done the expert witness testimony. They may have done all of the product investigation, evaluation that might help your case. You'll also find something you can show the court in your scenario, and that's a pattern of activity. If this business or person has done the same type of negative activity that you're claiming against them, and you can find those records in court, well, that puts you ahead of the game when you're going to the judge or to the jury to find out if they're going to decide in your favor. You may also find other parties that could be witnesses in your case. If you find 20 small claims cases against a company for some type of fraud or bad business dealings, you may find that the plaintiffs in those cases could be witnesses in your case, or they may provide evidence in your case to kind of show that this is not an isolated instance. Again, remember, we're not giving you legal advice. We're just telling you what other cases have done and what other people have done. Be sure to get your own good legal advice if you're going to proceed. When you're looking at the assets, another reason to look at assets is if you find that during the case, the defendant is moving assets from one class to another or from one person to another, sometimes you can show that to the court, to the judge, and they will take action on that. They might put a freeze on assets. They might give you some legal fees in your favor because this person is acting in bad faith. Another thing you're going to want to look at is criminal records. And this is important for a couple reasons. First of all, to make sure that your personal safety is not at risk. If you find somebody who is a litigant against you that has violent tendencies or crimes in the past, you might want to take precautions to make sure that you're not going to be in danger or threat of danger. And of course, if you're ever in danger, you want to just call the police and let them handle it. Criminal records also could be violations of statutes or laws regarding licensing. You know, if a person does not have a certain license to do the business that they're in, they may not have any kind of a defense in court for your claims that they're acting improperly. We had a case a few years ago where a person charged $8,000 or $9,000 to do vehicle repairs, rebuilding an engine, and doing some hot rod maintenance or performance upgrades to a classic car, and it was almost $9,000 worth of repairs. Coming to find out, this person did not have an automotive repair license, which was required in that state. So the plaintiff in this case was able to get a full recovery because the person wasn't even licensed to repair vehicles. And fortunately, we also discovered where they had been admonished for that in the past. Their license had been revoked for improper dealings. And then after that, they had received 2 criminal fines for repairing vehicles without a license. So this was evidence and information that was very helpful in the case. So if you can find criminal records that pertain to that defendant, it could be valuable to protect yourself from violent tendencies, but also show a pattern of criminal activity that matches what you're claiming that person's doing. Another part of that investigation is going to be looking at third parties. Do they have a spouse? Do they have business partners? Are there any names on deeds or corporate records or insurance policies that are partners or in conjunction with the defendant? Because those could be parties that you can claim against as well. For example, if somebody has a joint checking account and they deposited your check into an account with more than one person on it, you can make the claim that both people benefited. So again, it's a legal claim. You want to make sure you get good legal advice before you act on that. But finding other third parties that could be possibly liable or helpful in your case is something you want to document. Is there an attorney? Is there a law firm or an accounting firm that helped this client do things? Is there a sales company that was part of this bad activity against you? Something you want to document early on. May not be useful later, but if you have it, you never know when you're going to use it. Back to licenses. If the person or business that you are suing against is in a profession that requires a license, you want to make sure that license is valid, and it's valid for the location and the type of work they're doing. Many types of businesses, in addition to getting a license, are required to or elect to get a surety bond. So if you are a licensed contractor, let's say you are an electrical company, you probably have to obtain a surety bond before you get your license. And if there's a surety bond in place for that licensee, that bond may cover for bad activity or bad faith or failed contracts for that licensee, and you may be able to claim against that surety bond. So looking for that license and bond could be helpful. And the last thing you want to look at is relatives, family relatives of that person in the area. Those people could be either helpful to you if they're not, let's say, on good terms with your defendant, or they may also be a source for looking at hidden assets. Did the person hide assets in somebody else's name to get them away from the reach of a judgment? That may be something you want to look at later. And then you can look at records to see if those relatives are actually paying the upgrade fees or update fees on those assets. If somebody has a house put in their name, who's paying the taxes? Who's paying the insurance? If somebody has a car that they hid in somebody else's name, whose name is the insurance in? Where's the garaging address? So pre-litigation investigative reports can be very helpful. A lot of this a client can do themselves. We have some assistance that we can provide with that. We have some consultation we can provide with that. Most of the cost and the effort that goes into a pre-litigation investigation, whether it's an asset search or background on the parties, the cost of it is mostly labor, right? We spend 15, 20, sometimes 30 hours, man hours of labor doing an investigation. And if a client is willing to do a lot of that themselves, you can save a lot of money. There's very few hard costs involved. You might have to pay $1 or $2 for some real estate documents. You might have to pay $5 or $10 for vehicle record searches. So the hard costs are very small. It's the labor that's the big expense. So if you have the time and interest in doing a lot of this searching yourself, you may be able to save some money and get some good results if you have some guidance on doing that. So that's a very common scenario. The pre-litigation investigation has value. It makes your case flow better. It gives you better results in a court case, and also can get you better results for the recovery of the judgment. And that's one thing you want to look at is if you have searched for assets on that defendant in advance of the case, if you go to court and the judgment is issued in your favor and you already know the assets at that time, you can ask the judge right then and there to seize or lien the assets in the same hearing. If you wait and search for assets until the case is over, what will happen is now you have to go back to court. It could be a month or 2 or 3 later, depending on how backed up the court is, and it can cost you time, and maybe those assets can get moved. If you have in your briefcase or in your documentation a list of all the bank accounts, a list of all the real estate, a list of all the corporate assets, a list of the vehicles a person owns, when you go to court and the judgment is issued in your favor, you can hand that to the judge and say, Your Honor, I want to claim and seize these assets for my judgment. And depending on the nature of the case, they may be able to issue it right then. It saves you from having to go back to court, get a new calendar, get a new docket, and make that claim all over again. Plus, the case is fresh on the judge's mind or the court's mind at that time. So you're more likely to have that done in your favor if it's appropriate. Another thing that you may be able to do is if it's a default judgment, meaning that if the other party doesn't show up, sometimes a court is maybe hesitant on giving you a garnishment or a seizure on a default judgment. But if you're right there and you have all the documents and you can show bad faith, sometimes the probability goes a little higher that you can get that judgment or that writ of garnishment in your favor. Again, get good legal advice from an attorney before you do anything. Another subject that we'll talk about, this is a type of case that we see more and more of that has to do with corporate fraud. If you're a business owner or you run a company and you look at the ways that there might be frauds or scams against your company, one of them is embezzlement by employee time theft. And I'm not talking about somebody, taking a lunch break and not clocking out. I'm not talking about, somebody doing personal things on corporate time. That's going to happen. That's not really a big deal. What I'm talking about are fake or no-show employees. And if you have a large enough company, or if you have somebody handling payroll who has enough interest in doing this, and you can look at some of our other videos in what's called the fraud triangle, what goes into making somebody want to steal from your company. There's 3 elements involved. And if they are in that position where they want to steal, they can create an employee on paper who gets paid and the money goes to them, and there's no such employee. It's basically like a no-show employee. And as a business owner, you may not be able to detect it that easily. Sometimes you can adjust payroll records, either if it's an internal payroll or an external company like Gusto or something else that hides some of these records. And usually the first way that you pick up on it is your numbers are off, your KPIs are off, or your cost of sales is too high. And that'll indicate that there's something going wrong with that department and the expenses are off. And what you might find is that there's an employee, it might even have a name of somebody who is in the company. Sometimes they'll use a same name, but just use a different social security number and bank account to put the money into to hide the identity of that person. Sometimes it'll be a similar name. Let's say if you have, Sarah Jones that works in your company, they might change it to where it's Sarah without an H, so it doesn't throw off a red flag and it doesn't duplicate the actual name. And when you see that record, it might seem like it's okay. And there's ways that people who are familiar with payroll can conceal these. And the way that you're going to discover it, beyond the KPIs and the numbers being off, is if there is a common address on the payroll records or a fake address. If you look at payroll records and you see two people with the same address, that could be a red flag. If you see two people that have the same bank account that their direct deposit's going into, that could be a red flag. You're also going to want to occasionally do a cross check on your payroll sign off. Somebody in your company signs off on payroll. They approve the payroll. You may want to switch that role for a couple weeks so that if something is going on that's concealed, another person does it. A good best practice for companies is to have your bookkeeper take their vacation every year for a week or two to make sure that somebody else is looking at payroll. If you have a bookkeeper or an accountant that refuses to take days off, refuses to take any kind of vacation, that could be a red flag. That's one thing a lot of companies do to make sure that there's no theft. So you can cross-check payroll sign-off. You take whoever's signing off on payroll, you find another job, maybe inventory management, and you have them switch jobs for a couple weeks. It's a good way to have people cross-trained, and that's the way you can present it. You don't have to present it like you don't trust a person. And that way you get different people looking at different roles to make sure that there's nothing going on that you don't want to know about. Plus, even if there's an innocent error, sometimes another person will find it. Another way to check for no-show employees is to do a Social Security number verification. Any employee that's on your payroll that is getting a wage transfer, whether it's a check or it's a wire ACH, you want to make sure that tax ID number is actually a Social Security number. Sometimes a fraudster will use a business EIN as a Social Security number or a tax ID number, has the same number of digits. And if you put the hyphens in a different place, it looks like a social. So you want to verify those to make sure they're actual socials and not an EIN number. So that no-show employee corporate fraud, you may not think it's a big deal, but it's much more common than you think because it's easy to conceal. It's actually easier to conceal that than it is to conceal a fake check or a fake payable. So look for that in your company. So let's see what other questions we have on the email. And don't forget, you can also put them in on the chat function. And I'll put a little message there now to say that. All right, let's see what's on the chat. All right, we have a question here about how to help getting back my withdrawal from, and it has a company name. And we've seen this company name before without getting into too many details. This is a company that is online asking people for investment money. It's an overseas company. They're claiming to put money into various forms of cryptocurrency. It's not Bitcoin. There are other cryptocurrencies that they're saying they're going to trade money back and forth between these different companies. In fact, they have a stock video loop of a trading floor that is it's a fake video. We've actually backtracked this video and found that it's just something you can buy off of stock video websites. And they're trying to represent that trading cryptocurrency is just the same thing as trading other types of currencies, trading Japanese yen versus US dollar versus the euro, that kind of thing. And first of all, there is no trading going on within this company. They're just taking your money and they're giving you fake statements every month to show you that it's going up, but they're not really buying anything with your money other than probably clothes and vacations for themselves. In that case, how do you get your money back? Well, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you shut off sending them any more money. Don't fall for any request to send them a fee to withdraw money. If they say that in order to get your money out, you have to put some more money in for whatever reason. Sometimes they say that your balance has to be at a certain level to get money out. Sometimes they'll say there's a fee. Sometimes they'll tell you that, if you put in another 1,000, it'll double your money. Don't send them any more money, first of all. The next thing you want to do is keep your line of communications open. Don't call them a fraud and tell them they're a scam and you're going to call the police, because then they'll shut you down and you won't have any more access, which might be helpful. Third thing you want to do is make sure that you get any kind of legal advice that you need to make sure that you're not participating in anything illegal. And then try to identify who the parties are. When we do an investigation on these scams, we find out who the parties are behind these websites, behind these social media accounts, behind the emails. And if you can find out the individuals, you may be able to find out where their assets are. Do they have bank accounts? Do they have corporate offices? Do they have vehicles? And once you find those, that's how you would get your recovery through a judgment and garnishment. So you have to find out who the people are first, because whatever names they say, whatever emails they have are probably going to be fake names and false accounts. And you want to find out who the person is to begin with. First thing is, don't send them any more money. Another one, victim of an online scammer, fake investor. I sent them over 10,000. I would like to at least get that money back. Same thing. You got to find out who the person is first. That's the first step in your investigation, is to identify the actual person or company behind it, and then go from there. And that's actually not as hard as you think. There's usually code and watermarks and IP addresses hidden in their website, hidden in their emails, hidden on their social media that you can use to find out who the person is. So that's kind of the same question. So let's take a look at that question has been answered. Let's see this one. Okay, this person says, I'm owed money and need to find out if the person, assuming who owes the money, is a second signature on any bank account. Net worth is low. He does not have a car, home, or job. I need to plan for future garnishments. This is a good thought process. If the person that you're dealing with does not appear to have assets, first of all, there may be more assets than you think, but if they do not appear to have assets, if they are a co-signer or co-owner or multiple owners on any other asset, in some cases you can garnish that asset. For example, a bank account in many cases has what's called a right of set-off, meaning that if you have a claim against one account holder, one depositor, it claims against anything else that's attached to that name in the account. Again, as always, get good legal advice. Make sure you verify all this with your particular scenario. So if you want to try to find assets that may be associated with that person, you want to find out to see if they're a co-owner. Did they co-sign a loan for a car? Did they do a joint bank account? Are they an endorsement on a mortgage? Those types of things can connect that person to a third party, even if that, let's say, vehicle does not have any equity in it. You may be able to use that connection to claim assets against a third party if you can show that there's that kind of relationship. As far as bank accounts, yeah, you can do a bank account search for your debtor, that person, using their social security number and their ID. And if they are a co-owner on a bank account or a co-signer on a bank account, it will show up on a bank account search. That's actually a good strategy to use when you don't have a debtor that looks like they have money. All right, so this one says I have a court order for my divorce and my ex-husband is hiding money in unknown accounts. Kind of a similar question, but it's different that the accounts are unknown. Well, the first thing you're going to do is run a bank account search, and you're also going to look to see if there's any accounts in related parties. Sometimes when people try to hide money, they'll take money from their bank account and they'll put it in somebody else's name. They'll put it in another account, maybe in a corporate name, maybe in a relative's name. So you want to start with a search on them and then use that to spider out for other third parties that might be holding money. And a way to find that is either through a bank account search directly, through discovery and deposition of their old bank account records. If you find an old bank account, even if it's closed, you go back through 12 months worth of bank statements. If you find withdrawals or transfers that went out of that bank account, you want to know where they went, because maybe that's where it went into the other account. Maybe it was a cashier's check, and then you can find out what account that cashier's check went into. Maybe it was a wire transfer, Venmo payment. Even if it's a small amount, it may lead to where the larger money is being held. Sometimes somebody will send. We had a case where somebody purchased an asset. Let's leave it at that. And the asset transaction was relatively well concealed. But the way we found it is, after the asset was hidden, they sent a small payment of like $80 to pay a fee for that asset. And that was how the asset was discovered, over an $80 transaction. So here's a question on the chat. It says, what happens if you got scammed 6 years ago? 26-foot Cloud Trail. You know his name, not the last name. Not exactly sure what that means, but if you got scammed 6 years ago, the first question is going to be, is the nature of the scam in the statute of limitations? And that's a legal question, right? So you may find that in some states, you can't go back too far on a legal claim. Some states it's a year, 2 years, some states it's 5 years. So depending upon the nature of what the scam was, you may be past that. And if you're not, then you can go forward. First thing to do is document it. Document what the scam was, and see if there are contracts that you have, see if there are evidence you have of communications that show what that scam was about. And then if the person is still, or company, whoever it is still operating, you may be able to use the prior activity to match up with current activity to show that it's an ongoing enterprise. And that might also do what's called, and again, this is legal advice that you want to get from an attorney, not from online or an investigator, but we have done this kind of investigation before, where you do what's called tolling, where you show that the enterprise is still going on, so it goes past the statute of limitations. Again, don't take that as legal advice. Take it as an observation of some legal action we've seen happen before, and have your attorney explain it to you in more detail. And if you know somebody's first name but not the last name, one thing you can do is run a skip trace on that first name with only one other piece of cross-reference information. Let's say if you have a first name and a city, or a first name and a phone number, or a first name and an email, you can do a cross-reference and find out the identity of that person. In fact, you might not even need to know the first name. There's ways to do an investigation where if you know somebody is 35 years old, is a male, and they lived in these 3 cities, you might be able to find out who that is. If you have 3 cities in different places that they live, let's say in Boston, in, let's say, Amarillo, Texas, and maybe Phoenix, Arizona, and they're 35 years old, there may be a limited number of people that fit that profile, and then you can break it down from there to see which one likely matches your defendant. So if you know the first name at least, you can usually find out what the last name is through an investigation. So that's a pretty interesting question. Let's take a look here. All right. So here's a question from somebody who says, I'm looking for information for a case, no pay. Probably means that they want to get the information and they don't want to pay services. That's fine. Court case, looking bank account for cops. It sounds like that they're trying to get bank account information to give to law enforcement for a business, because it says bank account and payroll, and then it's in California. So if you have a business that you need to get financial information for, you can run a bank account check on a business. It's done using the EIN number instead of a social security number. It uses the same bank account record sources that we've talked about in videos before. It also will show you if they have a separate payroll account, that will show up as well. And you can look into that payroll account and see who the employees are, where the money went. Sometimes a fraudster will use a payroll account to distribute money to close colleagues in the form of payroll. So it is good to look at payroll accounts. And that's something that you could do yourself, or you can have a licensed investigator do for you. It's kind of the same question, asset search on a business. Let's see what we got here. All right, here we go. Trying to find my cousin and has a state name or a city name that I'll leave out. He went missing a few weeks ago. This is common. If you have a person who is seemingly out of contact, searching for that person is important in many cases to relatives, friends, colleagues, business associates. And skip tracing actually has come a long way, and there's many new methods that can be put into that. Some of it is physical observation, people on the ground, witness interviews, talking to people that are associated with the missing person, people they work with, people they're friends with. Usually if a person goes missing, if it wasn't foul play, meaning that somebody didn't kidnap them, which is pretty rare, the first thing you'll find is there are definitely clues that person has left of what they're doing, right? If they wanted to just get away from it all and go hiking in the woods for 3 weeks, they may not have told somebody directly, but there are clues to what they did tell somebody. They might have told somebody that, watch my dog for a couple weeks, or I won't be at the baseball game this Friday, and they'll leave some clues that this was an intentional thing. Where they went, there'll also be clues. There will be searches on a computer for maps for locations. There may be items purchased that will indicate camping gear, maybe cold weather gear if they live in a warm area. That is an indication. There will also be electronic records on their transport. If somebody gets from, let's say, Texas to Montana, they have to get there somehow. They're not going to walk. They're not going to ride their bike. They're going to take their car. They're going to take public transportation. They're going to fly a plane. Each one of those modes of transportation leaves a record. Even if it's driving your own car, your car is going to have GPS in it. Your phone's going to have GPS in it. That's going to show you where the person went. There's going to be receipts for fuel along the way. There's going to be receipts for hotels along the way. There may be tolls. If nothing else, there are public cameras everywhere. There's webcams, there's traffic cams, there's weather cams, there's cameras at public businesses like restaurants and bars. All of those will have records. Putting all that together, it's going to find the person. And even if they've left a populated area, socially dense area, and they've gone literally out into the woods, at some point they crossed that boundary, right? They left the place where there are people and cameras and receipts and gas stations and hotels, and they went into the woods. Well, however, whatever means they got to that boundary is still there. If they drove a car, they left it at that boundary and walked in the woods. They got gas right before they went there. They may have stayed in a hotel. They may have purchased some food. So it's just a matter of triangulating, right? They left the boundary of civilization and they went off the grid. It doesn't matter if they're off the grid now. What matters is when they left the grid, there is a record of that. And if they're truly off the grid, they can't go far because they're on foot, right? If they're still in their car or motorized transport, they're not really off the grid, and that can be tracked. So those types of situations, it's always a chain of events. You start with the most dense set of information by talking to people that they know, looking at their computer history, their phone history, their GPS history. And then as that breadcrumb trail gets thinner, you may look at hotel, gas stations, webcams, traffic cams. And as it gets even thinner, you're going to look at things like, where did they cross that boundary to go off the grid? Did they go out on a boat somewhere? Did they, get a small little dirt bike and ride somewhere? That's pretty rare. But in that case, then you resort to alternate means. If you know that they cross this boundary border of civilization on a certain date and time, they can only be within a certain radius. And that can be searched relatively simple. If it's truly a missing person that has, life-threatening details or some type of risk to the person, there's drones that have infrared that you can fly, and they can look within a large square mile radius to see if there's heat signatures of somebody in the woods. So that's extreme. Usually that's not the case. The types of cases we see is somebody just quit their job and they're not at their apartment or their house, and they're either shacked up with somebody or they're involved with a group of people they didn't used to hang around with. If that's the case, that's easy to find because they sent text messages, they sent emails, they're on social media with this new group of friends, this new group of associates, and that can be tracked. So a missing person is much easier now than it used to be. And even if it comes down to in-person conversations with colleagues, that's helpful. We'll do one more. And victim of an online scam. A lot of online scams. That's a big thing for last year and even so far this year. Online scams is a huge thing. So watch out for those. If you have anybody trying to get you to send them money for something, double, triple, quadruple check who it is, where the money's going, is it real? Let's see what this one is. Online scam again. Find a hidden bank account. This is in Australia. This is a spam email trying to get us to buy something from them. Here we go. This is tracking down email. Yeah, somebody looks like is sending email and sending messages through their Facebook accounts, things that are threatening. How can you track that down? Well, it's kind of the same as the online scam, finding the identity of the scammer. Every email, every social media post, every message has an origin. There's an IP address. There's a physical internet cyber signature associated with every device and also every pathway of communication. And there's a method of tracking that. The signature includes the IP addresses of all the hops in between, of the MAC address of the device. Sometimes this can be tried to be concealed and hidden, but there are ways of uncovering that. First thing you want to do is make sure you freeze and save all of the messages. You don't want to delete them. You want to save them, take screenshots. If there's a web page or a social media account, look at the source code in the browser of that account. You want to go into your Facebook and also look to see who's been on your Facebook page. You'll see other videos we have that'll show you how to look and see who's been on your Facebook page. Even if it's not the same username that is messaging you, sometimes somebody will go to your page and do what they call Facebook stalking and check you out. And then if they want to say something bad or do something mean, they'll make up a fake account or use another account to actually say it, thinking that their original contact or their original observation was covert. It's not. There's ways to see who was on your account. So even if it's not the same person who's sending messages, it might be helpful. That might be their real identity. Same thing with emails. If somebody's going to send you something bad, they're going to make up a fake email, joeschmo@hotmail.com or something like that. And you want to search back through to see what's in that message. What are the header codes? What are the IP codes? Also, you want to look to see who else has maybe sent you an email. Is there similar usernames? Are there similar time zones and patterns? Sometimes that person, they didn't show up out of the blue randomly. That's a person that probably has some other contact or communication with you. You might even suspect who it is, and you can use that to triangulate with that true identity to see who it is. So again, appreciate you guys visiting our live investigator video for this week. Make sure that you subscribe using the button at the bottom. So next time we have one in the following week, you'll be notified when it's going to go on the air. And if you have questions in the meantime, email our help desk, help@activeintel.com. And when the video's up, you can also message on the chat board on the right-hand side. And keep the good questions coming in, and we'll have our investigators come up with great answers for you.